Good evening. Wednesday, April 8th, 2026. Basically 1 o'clock in the morning, once again. I want to give a little intro to my Substack that I created. I guess it's been about a year and a half, maybe as much as 2 years. After October 7th, I started to write things and post it on my social network platform, and I got some pretty decent feedback, some pushback as well, but that was quickly dealt with knowledge and simply calling people's assumptions out very quickly, bluntly. I think that's the best way to do, or best way to deal with most adults, especially around cultural stuff, where their main disadvantage is they've made it personal, and so that limits them in understanding and empathizing with historical regrets and resentment and anger, unresolved debts that are connected to a people and their children and their children's children. And so when someone has a strong opinion about Israel has the right to defend itself, they're coming from a very limited platform. You can hardly call it a platform. It's more like standing on a golf tee and trying to hit the ball. It's hardly worth engaging someone like that, because they're defending their own day-to-day relationship to an imaginary picture, which is not really my business unless they make it my business, which they did. And so I found that the quickest way to choose your battles is to simply state your position, give some not so obvious to some people headliners, and leave it at that. Most of the people that I burned bridges with were acquaintances, not good friends. So it's easy to burn bridges that are still rolled up on paper in tubes. So it happens. No big deal. Back to the Substack. So after about a year maybe of posting, I decided to, after getting shadow banned a couple times and in limited amount of followers on this particular platform, I mean, this was in the early days, like the first year, maybe year and a half, when the propaganda was deep. AIPAC was going 24/7, really clamping down the brass knuckles onto the face of American pushback from mainly the left. It was a wild and crazy time. Still is. You had Joe Biden's moral dementia. Now you have Donald Trump's psychopathy and brazen spinning out on his own unmet childhood needs. And so with this Substack, I went back to my first post, and this was all done on my laptop, and I would collage or put together, depending on how long the writing was, from 1 to 5 or 6 posts within a post on Substack, and I would post it along with graphics that I pulled and cropped and would paste in to Substack. And I was away from California for about 10 months, and it took me about 6 or 7 months to do this, pretty much every day, working on it. And so there's about 800 posts on Substack under Paradox House, if you're interested. But in this intro tonight, I want to preface Paradox House and its existence and the nature of its existence and how it came about. Some of that I've already spoken about, of course. But I wanted to talk about mindset and where I was at the time and where I still am in many ways, but maybe a little more anchored and cooling off from the disillusionment and disgust and the rage and the just the sheer, I wouldn't say trauma, because trauma is living in Gaza. So I don't want to give a vibe that somehow there's any comparison there by using such words. So I definitely had a reaction, and something. It felt like the Palestinian situation took hold of me, almost like a third party, or I guess you could say a second party. And I think I've spoken about this before, where I knew about Israel, that it had been, quote, attacked from pretty much every neighbor it has had. But I didn't know that it started in 1948. I thought naively, it had always been there, in a sense. I mean, my focuses are not so much, or never have been, on Israel. I mean, it's mainly more Russia, Egypt, um, the islands of Greece, a little bit of England, Holland, Austria, a few other places. That's not coming to my mind, but Italy, that's a place. And then other countries I'm just interested in, natural phenomenon, stuff that's going on there, like Iceland, basically a volcano unto itself, in a way. Not that it's a volcano, but just the ever-shifting landscape, literally. Nonetheless, Paradox House is a very blunt, I guess you could call it somewhat of an artistic approach of expressing emotion and dismay and criticism. And for me, it's still very real. It's a real legacy of true response. And of course, in the early days, I got a couple people implying and outright saying that I was anti-Semitic, and which is just, again, a total insult to any real, reasonable human being thinking about what's going on over there. I would have the same critique if it were early Anglo-Saxon Catholics mass slaughtering the indigenous of Turtle Island. Any ethnic genocide. And I've in my lifetime, I've heard about and read and understood many genocides, small in number, in the sense that not on the scale of the Spanish in South America and the Turtle Island situation and other genocides that went into several millions. So the idea that, like, I think what caught me was how the casual American was duped for decades and decades of propaganda. And since I didn't really have a reason to look at Israel in a scrutinizing way, I made a lot of normal assumptions. Well, they're having a hard time. They're being persecuted, and there they are, and here I am. And and it wasn't really an issue. It had not come into like a world stage at the time of all the way up until October 7th. Nothing that really happened over there made a consistent headline in the context of Israel and their occupation of the Palestinians. All that was very much kept under an ironclad propaganda screen or wall, I should say. And only hardcore journalists, independent journalists, not mainstream media journalists, but independent journalists and Amnesty International and various human rights organizations really knew what was going on over there, but they don't get any primetime slots. The U.S. State Department makes sure of that. So the criticism, that whole situation, I felt like there were parts of me living it, like because it would trigger things in me. Not that I was living it as if somehow I'm a victim comparable to those of Gaza. That would be delusional. But in my own way, I was being affected by it. And it sort of corkscrewed me into a certain mood of disillusionment, because by investigating the Israel-Palestine situation, I, of course, tripped over and crawled through all sorts of catacombs of U.S. State Department war crimes, warehouses of caskets, figuratively speaking, and very possibly literally speaking. Israel keeps the dead on ice and in unmarked graves as collective punishment for the Palestinian families. Just a side note. So, but the more and also maybe because I've had some personal experiences with cults, and the mentality and the degradation and dignity destroying or suffocation or mummification. Growing up, I'll get into maybe that at some other time, but ultimately I've got some experience with ideological systems similar to that mindset, not on the level of Israel, that's for sure. I mean, where you have a nuclear armed cult that is ultimately sacrificing the dreams of innocence in order to live out a nightmarish justification for celebrating their sense of of place in the world. It's a very it's a very strange way of building a lifestyle, a militant, us and them lifestyle. It can't but distort a human being when you have to be extra and exaggerate your own sense of self in order to put at bay and keep at bay a screaming conscience, if you have one that screams. There are a lot of sociopaths in Israel that, as far as I can tell, they're just simply a walking idea or thought form. There's no emotions occurring. And the only emotions that actually seem to occur is when they agree with themselves and when they have destroyed something innocent in order for a corrupted version of what is right, which is universally considered wrong, to serve their needs and desires and imaginary pictures. So it's a very insular situation over there. You've got the Iron Dome, which of course is a nickname or what they call the missile defense system that was ultimately built for militia missiles, like missiles that are being launched from the shoulder or ground tripods, or something that could be towed with a 1-ton truck. But not the kind of missiles that they're not supersonic missiles, and not the behemoth ones that are coming their way via Iran. So nonetheless, that's a little bit of a deviation there. It's late and I'm going to stroll down side streets from time to time. So the Iron Dome is also something that ethno-supremacy, ethno-nationalism creates over the mass consciousness. Not conscious, well, yeah, I guess you could say consciousness. But in this case, it creates more than it masks. So just keep in mind that Israel is very young. It's not even 100 years old. So we have first generation migrants from Europe there, the Ashkenazi Jews. Some of them are still hanging in there. And then we have second generation and third, maybe fourth, but in 75 years, I think you've got about a possibility of like 3 generations with no history in that region as far as like the mass populace. I'm talking about the Jews that were exported from Europe, and then the ones that were coerced to come from other areas of the Middle East. So that particular identity as an Israeli is very young. I mean, we're talking on the scale of civilization, preschool. So the Israeli citizenry, they have no real footing as far as like anything to fall back on as a dependable routine or proof of a kind of it's hard for me to come up with a phrase for it, but like countries that have been around for 1,000 years or more, they've all made horrendous mistakes, and some of those mistakes have not been resolved. They carry forward, the shadow of those mistakes carry forward in other forms, and yet the people carry they carry that, and maybe they're a better version of their ancestors. And yet there's a kind of a density in a people that have been making those mistakes over and over again and living in that same area for 1,000 years or more. There's a density there. There's a gravitas, I guess you could say, or a kind of a sense of like being able to have a long thought, go back and feel and think and ponder and debate. Israel can't do that. They haven't been around long enough to be able to have like a sentimental moment of like, well, imagine what it was like back in the Bronze Age. Like there's just no history there in that sense. I mean, there were King Solomon's temple and various holy sites and things, but nothing. It was short-lived, and because of course the Romans came in and did their thing. So the migratory nomadic nature of these people, shifting around here and there, it's part of their identity. And of course, when they settled into Palestine militantly, through military force, and ethnic cleansing, they displaced 700,000 plus Palestinians, and of course erased thousands. So it was an atrocious situation. You can go back and learn about the Nakba and all of its peripheral massacres and all the espionage that the early IDF did on their own synagogues, bombing them in other regions in order to put fear in Jewish communities so that they would move and migrate to Israel, because they needed people. They needed occupants, and there's a lot to it. But back to the Substack and its effect on me. If you do go there and you see what's there, just remember that I still create art around this situation, collage, through Photoshop and various other mediums, and well, mediums within Photoshop and some AI prompting and merging the two together. I feel that this world needs more raw emotion and raw critique. Individuals that can tell it as it is in the moment, not judge it as if the people are a monolith and everyone's involved per se, but to have an emotional response and to interpret that response through visual representation, like a kind of an artifact of sorts, I feel is legitimate. It's a legitimate record of a response, a legitimate response to atrocities and what is wrong and what needs reconciliation. And Iran wants a nuclear weapon, and they should want a nuclear weapon. Saudi Arabia wants a nuclear weapon too, but for different reasons. And you can see now with what's happening with Iran, and this is spinning off into speaking about atrocities and response, that America and Israel and the UK and the G7 in general, they have been using and abusing and manipulating and overthrowing the Middle East for centuries. And it's a plaything for their psychopathy. It's a victim of their victimizer pathology. And Anglo-Saxon supremacy is a mental illness. And of course, there's no excuse for that. It's just simply a fact that it is a inhuman impulse. It is something that circulates in the psyche that I don't necessarily have an explanation tonight for it. I may have an explanation for it, but right now, tonight's not the platform for that. But I can say that it is truly inhuman, and we'll leave it at a mental illness. So when a country has nuclear weapons, it's a deterrent to that psychopathy. The psychopathy has to then think and gauge. It is an automatic handbrake that stops the ego for a moment and makes it self-reflect. Because it's one thing, a ground invasion. You can't ground invade a nuclear warhead. It ground invades you. It's on such a scale, hydrogen warfare, that's not warfare. That's just a circumstance. It explodes, things disappear, literally. That's not warfare. That's just, how many do you have? Well, how many do I have? And then you push a button, and then you maybe survive the nuclear winter for a little while, and then you also fade away. So ultimately, it doesn't give the ego a lot of fanfare. No spoils of war, no selfies. Um, it's on a different scale, and so it gives the ego a moment of a mic check. Um, it's not something the ego has self-imposed upon itself. It is forced, and then the ego and the psychopathy has to deliberate, something else that the ego doesn't like to do, and weigh and think about things. And by the time it's finished thinking, it's calmed down and it's reconsidering its position. And this is why you don't have the United States invading China or North Korea or Russia, because they couldn't. If the United States tried to invade Russia, Russia would use their deterrence. Why put up with a bunch of screaming enemy soldiers and battleships when you can just push a button? So the reason Trump doesn't want Iran to have a nuclear weapon is because that means he doesn't have that means the West and Israel, they don't have a plaything anymore. They don't have a place to put their superiority complex into action. Not that anything someone with a superiority complex does proves they're superior. On the contrary, it proves that they are overcompensating for less than normal existence that they're capable of at that moment. Every exaggeration hides a deficiency. So Iran will have a nuclear weapon, that's for sure. And again, any sovereign nation under the threat of a juvenile, ethno-cult, nationalist, genocidist society needs a deterrent. If anyone needs a deterrent, it's every country within a 1,000-mile radius of Israel, because Israel has nuclear weapons illegally, and you never hear about it in the mainstream media, but they've had them since the early 70s, late 60s, early 70s. They started to develop them with South Africa, apartheid South Africa, curiously enough. And that whole story is as psychotic and nutty as can be. I mean, it's just how they acquired the yellow cake, how it was all clandestine, the USS Liberty, and how they bombed and killed American citizens on that ship, and the CIA supposedly were trying to monitor and look in on what Israel was up to, fooling around with higher grades of uranium. It's one of the most criminal, fraught with privilege and psychopathy stories I've come across in at least in the pragmatics of Israel's development. I'm not talking about humanitarian tragedies, but just the pragmatics. So with the Substack, it is very much for me an expression of emotion and a slow death of this naive romance that I had with a certain slice of life. And it changed my life forever. The Palestinian situation has truly changed me. It's with me every day, every night, everywhere I go. It will. I'll most certainly take it with me into the void, and what that effect, that impact had on me. It changed so many other things I can't even get into tonight because I need to get some rest. But I do want to read something that I wrote tonight. And remember that when you read things and see things, understand, at least from me, that I'm speaking about the present, today, how I feel, what I see, what is proving itself in action that cannot be seen any other way, objectively. And so when an Israeli IDF soldier says that if a child throws a rock at him, he considers that child a terrorist. So think about that. Are there any nuances there that you feel can be argued with that mindset? And if I critique it and say, well, that's psychotic. Well, I mean, that's a flippant, broad brushstroke word, of course. But I'm dismissing that statement as having any sanity whatsoever. It's coming from a different category of whoever or whatever is saying it. It's not a reasonable position. It's not, and you've got documented cases of bullets lodged in children's heads that demonstratively prove that these were headshots. I'm not talking about 16, 17, 18-year-old children. I'm talking about little kids, 7, 8, 10, 11, 12, maybe younger, but there's an ongoing special investigation being put together around that whole category of findings in Gaza. So we have IDF soldiers going around assassinating little kids, and you might look into Hind Rajab's story. Her family was, their car was mowed down with them in it by the IDF, and she was miraculously left alive, and she made a phone call to the ambulance service, and they recorded it. And by the time they got there, she had been also gunned down because the IDF had come back around, I guess, and checked the car and probably saw movement in the car and understood that there was someone there, a witness, and didn't want the story to get out but probably didn't know that, and well, of course they didn't know that she had called, and there was a live recording of her, and the IDF said that they were not in the area at the time, but later independent journalists, along with independent satellite footage of that day, of that time, showed an IDF, it was either one or two tank brigades. I'm not sure if you can call it a brigade, but there were tanks in the area, and so those tanks also have some models, they have mounted guns on them as well. So the IDF was in the area, and often, of course, where there's tanks, there's ground troops of some sort. It's a tragedy of thousands of such cases throughout the years that this genocide's been going on. So apathy is not my friend, and complacency is not my friend. Compartmentalizing emotion is not my friend. I internalize and process the rage and the sense of injustice and the empathy that was coming from me at the time and still does. I have to process it. Otherwise, my mental health starts to disintegrate, and I have to do something with it. Otherwise, it does things with me. So I'm going to read this piece and call it a night. So this is something I wrote again tonight. And this is around what I see to be a kind of collapse of Israel's status quo. It can go in several different directions. I figure 3. Complete interior implosion, where there's like a civil war between different factions of Israelis, and it all gets blown apart, and it just eventually becomes a ghost town. And then another is the Samson option, where Israel says that if they feel like they're in an existential threat, they will launch nuclear warheads in every direction, which, of course, then there would be a response, particularly from Pakistan, probably, and Russia, maybe, because Russia and Iran are, there's a geographical situation going on there that Russia has less tolerance for Israel than, say, someone far away or further away because of just geographical proximity and military strategy as well, because Russia will not let Iran become another NATO target, or not target, but nesting place. They already proved that with Ukraine, and not that that justifies what they're doing in Ukraine. I'm just saying that it's one of the big driving forces is Russia's got its own version of psychopathy as well, and paranoia, and problems with integrating and considering other people worthy of being their neighbors. So here we go. And this is right after today Trump is saying he's going to agree to the 10-point proposal by Iran. Whether he's going to or not is another question. He's all over the place and no place. So thanks for hanging in there with me tonight. It's been a doozy of a day. I have to tell you. So it starts. Trump's backpedaling, selling tacos again. If you don't know what that means, look up tacoing. Flailing, beating around the bush, crying wolf, etc. Trump's backpedaling, selling tacos again. Nothing is what it seems. Israel is no doubt spinning in its living grave plot, and an actual grave plot they've created in Gaza and the West Bank via their ongoing genocides. This includes all Arabian soils Israel has attacked preemptively since 1948. Israel, a dazzling wasteland of immoral cultist propaganda and happenstance magical thinking, destroying lives in order to live justified in the holy light of a self-glittered, embellished navel. Watch for Israel's rogue nature's steady blowout as it breaks the Trump ceasefire. It won't be able to resist. It has never kept a ceasefire agreement in its existence. It sets up ceasefires in order to regroup, rearm, take some arms, then go around the back of the negotiators and assassinate their people and later them. Facts. Research it. Israel, if it feels isolated, will begin to lash out. Its collective denial is far too deep-seated to be an easy weed to pull by a USA reprimand. It will not sleep, for it cannot awake. It will find a way to self-sabotage the USA to the betterment of its moral race to the bottom of its utter disillusionment, i.e., it has the right to relentlessly threaten, bribe, blackmail, imprison, torture, and mass slaughter innocents to infinity. It is a form of its ideological self-expression, and only the blood of innocents will camouflage the loss of its own, that is, their own innocence, which ancestrally, I have no idea when they lost it, generally speaking. It was a long time ago. And again, I'm speaking about the loss of innocence through an ideological belief structure that makes an us and them power dynamic, which is completely a fabrication of the human mind. It does not exist by itself. It is only reliant on the imagination of the human beings agreeing to it as being true. It's not a fact. It's just a bad idea, cloaked in religious jargon and other ingredients of fantastical thinking and dull moral wit. All cults fail. They are systems whereby people are processed and spit out. The machine has a lifespan, usually one that's older than the people's life expectancy, keeping it oiled, shiny, and fueled. But it is still but a machine, built by the collective group psyche as an outward projection of an internal denial deflection. It is an unnatural thing, creeping about the shadows of genocide celebrations and solid gold hangman's loops worn on the lapels of the Knesset in celebration of their version of Jim Crow lynching laws. The Knesset, Israel's cult leader elites, far-right antagonists of anarchy, atheism, genocide, infanticide, assassination, illegal surveillance, espionage manufacturing, and atrocities upon Gazan and West Bank children too dire to type out in public. As thousands of Palestinians languish illegally in Israeli prisons, the prison shareholders are being left holding their vengeance torches alone in a mouthless cave of their own making. Its teeth are awakening. The UK knows Iran in ways the USA cannot, and they share a much greater array of territorial considerations like ICBM's range, real blowback probabilities if they entertain Trump's TV evangelical slop fests, and are thinking about real populations inside their own borders that may or may not be blind to the ideology of border sovereignty and moral respect for Anglo-Saxon class position and master status. So, they want nothing to do with Iran. They understand their past failures to take it for themselves. Maybe they even feel something raw about stacking more of their own people's bodies on top and inside their already jam-packed ancestral catacombs of debts unpaid. Israel cannot exist alone. It needs attention. Any category of attention will do. Trump is the same, and he will compete against Israel's needs if those needs puts his own quota lower than his daily dose routine. Israel needs an enemy. Its whole ideological framework is built upon the other. It is their coping mechanism. Innocence and the stranger are always unsuspecting screens by which sociopathy projects its narcissistic shadows' shortcomings, superstitions, private judgments, and assumptions. Where does all this stuff come from? Projected towards a people never given the chance to be seen as human as well. It comes from the individual's own self-image conditions, details, beleaguered belief systems, and a vast array of mental illnesses that are part and parcel in such a cult of ethno-ideological practices as Israel's occupation of Palestine has wrought out, invented anew even from the shadow of their own receptions by the Germans of old. Again, the other. It is their coping mechanism par excellence. They need the glass darkly to remain dark. They need the evangelical Christian cuckeries, dissonance as well. A sassy plaything, their relationship. A tongue in the mouth of a skeletonized head cannon, empty of balls but filled to overflowing with pirate gold. Right now is the most dangerous time of Israel's collective mental state. A dark night of the soul may be coming, and the world cannot brace for it. It can only mop up the wasteland Palestine will become as Israel unravels from its nucleus outwards. Like a neutron star hanging in the void with nothing else better to do than make a bigger deal of having been so small in such a place as space. Space giggles when big planets boast. So here's a suggestion for those who are tripping out over the differences, thinking that you're different, or they're worse and I'm better, or better you than me, and all those other inhumane slogans that somehow keep people away from educating themselves. Hop on YouTube, look up Unseen Iran, or Ancient Persia, or the unknown Iran. Iran has been demonized and turned into the other by both the ethno-supremacist Anglo-Saxons, Britain, America, and their G7 enablers, and by Israel, product of Britain and Anglo-Saxon enabling as well, curiously enough. So do your own research. Don't let ideas live free in your mind palace. I feel like the little sins invite big ones, and I support people approaching their demons not like an exorcist would. That's a little too flamboyant and well, I mean, but in my opinion, it's ignorance. This whole idea of getting rid of. If something is in your mental field, in your mood, it's there for a reason. And it's important to find out what that reason is, no matter how long it takes. For some people, it may take a lifetime and possibly beyond. But to deny it and to put up roadblocks, to create habits that keep you away from it, that make it smaller or insignificant, it only gets bigger. And you don't always know how big it's gotten until the ceiling collapses. Because it lives in the attic. It doesn't live in the basement. Some things live in the basement. But the big boy, he lives in the attic. And so, again, do some research. Give yourself a benefit of the doubt. And exercise humanity, exercise expressing your feelings, and be brave with the truth. People say Israel and the Palestinians, it's a complex situation. It's not complex. It is absolutely not. It is simply a militant occupation of a previously occupied piece of geography where 700,000 people were forcefully moved off their land seized, their homes seized, their personal property seized. Those refugees went in every direction except the ocean, and probably went into the ocean but not alive by the hands of the IDF. The refugees went to Lebanon, Jordan, Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, you name it, Palestinian refugees are there. And Gaza was the concentration camp where it was not only refugees from the Nakba, it was also a concentration camp for the ongoing ethnic cleansing going on in the West Bank. So it was a utility. Gaza was a utility because instead of pissing off the Egyptians or the Jordanians or the UAE, Saudi Arabia, whatever else neighbor that might throw up their hands with a few hundred refugees coming in every month or so. Gaza was their open air prison where when they would evict a family, mow down their olive grove, burn it, plant some European pines, build 2 or 3 condominiums, sell some of them to some folks in New York or New Jersey or upstate New Hampshire or wherever else a buyer might be. That family would be transported with all but what they could carry away from their home and property to Gaza. Folks, this stuff will keep continuing in some way, shape, or form. Evolution repeats things until those things get it right. And the mind, the nature of the mind, will have to become the priority, and the care of it, and the maintenance of it, and the morals, ethics, principles, those won't change because they are what they are. To me, they're the original angels, not some winged being with an attitude or a problem with my attitude. These are neutral laws that operate within the human psyche. They cannot be changed. They cannot be altered. They can be debated. People can add and subtract nuances, but ultimately, there's certain core tenets of morals, principles, ethics that simply cannot be bent. They cannot be tattooed, they cannot be added or subtracted, and they cannot be nuanced. So there's the trunk of the tree, and then there's branches, and then there's leaves, and then there's fruit. So the further away you get from the trunk, yes, you can debate and nuance and haggle, but when you get closer to the trunk, that part has to be enforced. And I'll get into some of that later, some ideas I have around that. Thank you for hanging out with me in my imagination of you hanging out with me. And all the best in whatever you're doing. Again, educate your assumptions, your generalities, your belief systems, anything that crosses your mind that hurts another person in your mind, that uses that person as a depository for your shadow, for your resentment, or your superstitions, or your suspicions, or your jealousy, or vengeance. And then once you clear that target, then maybe you can trace the dart to your own hand, and then your hand to your wrist and elbow and shoulder, and across your collarbone and to your head, and figure out what's creeping around in your temple. Thank you again, and good night.